The edge of redemption. Ethan Reeves never imagined planning a man's murder would become part of his civilian life. At 40, he'd witnessed enough death during his tour in Afghanistan, and these days, he preferred saving lives in the rugged mountains of Colorado. But something primal shifted inside him when he spotted his wife Meredith slipping from the visiting surgeon's hotel room at dawn. Now, watching Dr. Richard Harrison, that self-important 50-year-old medical hotshot from Boston, Ethan knew, with cold certainty, that only one of them would descend from these mountains alive. The only question remaining was how mercilessly he would execute his flawless Special Forces plan, unless something unexpected intervened. The crisp October morning was just breaking over Pine Ridge, a small town nestled among the towering peaks of the Colorado Rockies. Ethan Reeves, head of the local mountain rescue team, trudged home after an all-night mission to retrieve a group of lost hikers. 12 years in the Navy SEALs had conditioned his body to function on minimal sleep, and despite his exhaustion, his weathered boots struck the pavement with purpose. He planned to retrieve the radio he'd forgotten at headquarters, catch a few hours of sleep, and then report for his day shift. Fate, however, had something entirely different in store. At 6 in the morning, passing the Mountain Haven Lodge, Ethan witnessed something that would shatter his world like an avalanche. His wife Meredith, a 37-year-old physician at the regional medical center, was hurriedly exiting through the side entrance. She hadn't noticed him as she rushed away, adjusting her disheveled auburn hair while glancing nervously over her shoulder. Ethan froze in the shadow of a nearby fire escape. That particular hotel was currently hosting Dr. Richard Harrison, a renowned neurosurgeon from Boston who had arrived in their small town just days ago to deliver a series of lectures on emergency surgery in extreme conditions. Ethan had attended one presentation himself, an impressive account of operations performed in the mountains of Afghanistan, where Harrison had served with Doctors Without Borders. As if on cue, the town hall clock chimed 6 when Harrison himself emerged from the same entrance. The 50-year-old surgeon, impeccably dressed in an expensive tailored suit, was straightening his silk tie with manicured fingers. He didn't notice Ethan standing motionless in the shadows. The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. Room 304, Meredith's tousled hair, the smug, polished surgeon. A glacier of rage formed in Ethan's gut, a sensation he had experienced only in combat before a high-stakes mission. The cold, calculating fury of a professional killer. He knew with absolute certainty that it was now merely a question of timing and opportunity. At 6:42, the shrill ring of a telephone shattered the quiet of the rescue station. Ethan was pouring his first cup of coffee, trying to wash away the bitter taste of betrayal with the scalding liquid. "Ethan," Jenny's voice, the station dispatcher, trembled with urgency. "Emergency on North Ridge. Tourist with internal bleeding at 13,000 feet." He set down his mug, instantly switching to rescue mode. "Give me details." Male 44 with his wife. She says it started 6 hours ago. Severe abdominal pain, pallor, cold sweats. Began vomiting blood about an hour ago. "Can we bring him down?" "Negative," Jenny's voice edged toward panic. "Not from that elevation. Helicopter can't reach them. Besides, his wife says any movement intensifies the bleeding. She claims transportation would kill him. We need to perform emergency surgery up there, then evacuate him to a point where our bird can reach." Ethan studied the wall map. North Ridge meant at least 2 days of hiking via the safe route. The tourist didn't have 2 days. Suddenly, it clicked. Harrison's lecture yesterday had covered exactly this scenario. Surgery in extreme mountain conditions. Perfect. "Jenny, call an emergency consultation at the medical center, and find me that." He clenched his jaw. "Dr. Harrison." By 7:15, the conference room at Pine Ridge Medical Center buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Chief of Medicine Dr. Grayson spread scans and maps across the table. Meredith sat beside Harrison, carefully avoiding her husband's gaze. The town's entire medical elite, 5 physicians and 3 nurses, huddled around the table. "The situation is critical," Dr. Grayson explained. "Symptoms suggest a perforated ulcer or internal hemorrhage. Without immediate surgery, his chances are nil." At that elevation, Harrison shook his head. "Without equipment, without a proper operating room." "What about your lectures?" Ethan asked quietly. All heads turned toward him. "Yesterday you described performing surgery in the mountains, the one you did with a flashlight and a hunting knife, in the Afghan mountains." Harrison flinched. "You were there, Afghanistan." SEAL Team 3, May 2008. Something passed between them, recognition, understanding. They had both tasted the same war. "Don't worry, Doc, no insurgents up there. And I'll take you the fastest route," Ethan continued. "Minimal gear, maximum speed. You operate, I guarantee your safety. And we'll take a different route back," he added silently to himself. "The one nobody returns from, you son of a bitch." Meredith jumped to her feet. "Richard, this is madness. You don't know these mountains." She stopped mid-sentence, catching her husband's gaze. For the first time that morning, genuine fear flickered across her face, primal, instinctive terror. Harrison slowly stood. "I accept. It's a professional challenge. You're right, Ethan, lectures are worthless without practice. I place myself entirely in your hands." By 8:15, they were ascending the mountain trail. Ahead lay a 2-day trek, an extraordinarily complex surgery at 13,000 feet, and the return journey. Ethan knew only one of them would make it back, and that someone would not be Dr. Richard Harrison from Boston. "You're a good surgeon, Doc," Ethan thought, watching Harrison's broad back climbing ahead. "Maybe even a decent man, but you slept with my wife, and for that there's a price to pay." In his backpack lay a map with a pre-marked return route, the very one from which no one had ever returned alive. Chapter 2: The Ascent. Time flows differently in the mountains. Each step becomes a metronome beat, measuring not minutes but heartbeats. Thump, 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 thump. Another step on the ice-glazed slope. Another breath of searing cold air. Ethan Reeves knew this rhythm as intimately as he knew every rock on this trail. He had deliberately chosen the most challenging route, the one that snaked along the eastern slope, where the wind struck directly in your face and the path frequently threatened to disappear beneath your feet. The snow beneath their boots resembled crushed glass. The sun hammered their eyes, reflecting off thousands of ice fragments. They had been climbing for 5 hours, exchanging barely a handful of words. Dr. Richard Harrison followed behind, breathing heavily. His expensive gear, undoubtedly purchased from some high-end outfitter in Boston, was already coated with a layer of frost. "Damn amateurs," Ethan thought, hearing the surgeon stumble behind him. "Bought $5,000 worth of equipment and thinks he's ready for the mountains." But Harrison surprised him. Not once did he ask for a break, nor did he complain about the cold or thin air. He simply continued walking, stubbornly placing one foot in front of the other. There was something professional about it. Like a soldier on a forced march, you just take step after step because you must. The radio on Ethan's belt crackled to life. "Base calling, team, over." "Team receiving." Ethan raised the radio to his lips. "Over." "Patient's condition, deteriorating." Jenny's voice broke through the static. "Repeat, deteriorating." Harrison moved closer, his face hardening. "Ask for details." They stood for 10 minutes trying to maintain the connection. Through the static, they gathered the essential information. The tourist up above had developed a fever. Time was running out. "We need to move faster." Harrison adjusted his backpack straps. Ethan nodded silently. Something in the surgeon's voice made him look more carefully. The polished doctor from the conference room was gone. His eyes now held steel, his movements became precise. A professional, damn it. They continued climbing. The trail wound between sharp rock outcroppings, narrowing with each meter. To the right gaped a sheer drop, a clean 1,300 feet down. Harrison carefully kept to the left side, not from fear, but from sensible conservation of energy. The wind intensified, hurling stinging snow pellets into their faces. Visibility dropped to mere yards. Ethan tried to recall the weather forecast, something about a cyclone arriving by evening. They needed to find shelter before the real storm hit. There should be an old alpine refuge ahead, he shouted through the wind. About 40 minutes away. How far are we from the patient? Harrison shielded his face from the snow. If the weather holds, we'll reach him by tomorrow evening. They barely spoke while walking. Each man conserved his breath. At 8,000 feet, every gulp of air was precious. Ethan observed the surgeon from the corner of his eye. Something had subtly changed in him when they'd heard about the patient's deteriorating condition, as if an internal mechanism had activated. Harrison's phone unexpectedly came to life. At this elevation, signals occasionally broke through if you were lucky. The surgeon dropped his backpack, pulled out his phone with trembling, cold-numbed fingers. "Hello, Emily. What's wrong, sweetheart?" Ethan couldn't help overhearing. The speaker emitted labored breathing. "Dad, I can't breathe." "Easy, honey, easy. Where's your inhaler?" "Empty, spare one. Can't find it." "In my office desk top drawer. Get Mom okay." Through the crackling and gasping came a woman's voice. "Richard, have you lost your mind, climbing mountains? Your daughter's having an attack and you're—" The connection died. Harrison stared at the darkened screen for several seconds. "How old is your daughter?" Ethan asked, surprised by his own question. 16. Asthma since birth. Harrison pocketed the phone. "The younger one is 9, Grace." Something twisted in Ethan's chest. He and Meredith had no children. She always insisted it was too soon, that her career needed to come first. Yet this polished surgeon from the big city turned out to be a father. Ethan shook his head, banishing unwelcome thoughts. By evening they reached the refuge, a small cabin nestled between rocks. Inside was cold, but at least there was no wind. While Harrison awkwardly fiddled with the portable stove, Ethan checked their equipment. "You're holding up pretty well for a city slicker," he remarked. "Afghanistan taught me," answered Harrison without looking up. 2 years with Doctors Without Borders. There you either learn to survive or—" He fell silent. "Kandahar." "Yes, May 2008. Ethan turned slowly. "The operating room in the abandoned school." "You were there." Harrison's voice registered surprise. "Secured the perimeter. Remember that boy who stepped on a mine?" Harrison nodded. 8 hours under flashlights. The generator died, but we couldn't stop. The kid wouldn't have survived a second anesthetic. "You saved him." "And a month later I was taken captive," Harrison shuddered. 3 weeks in an earthen pit, 6 by 6 feet. They fell silent. The stove crackled with burning fuel while outside the cabin the wind howled. Ethan studied the surgeon surreptitiously. The man before him was not just a doctor from a wealthy clinic. This man had seen war, saved lives, endured captivity. He had backbone. The radio crackled again. "Base calling, team." "Receiving." Ethan held the radio to his ear. "Patient worse, temperature 104. Harrison jumped up. "Why the hell are we sitting here? We need to move." "In this blizzard," Ethan nodded toward the window, blanketed with snow. "Want them to find 3 corpses instead of 1. The surgeon sank back onto the bench, clenching his fists. In his eyes, Ethan recognized a familiar expression, the look of a man who knows he must do something but cannot. He had often seen that look in the mirror. "Do you think we'll make it in time?" asked Harrison. "We should. If the storm subsides by morning, we'll be there tomorrow." "And after that?" "Then we descend, by a different route." Harrison gave him a thoughtful look. By the way, I've been meaning to ask. That attractive woman at the hospital, in the light dress unsuitable for the season with the rather revealing neckline, who seemed so concerned. Meredith, right? She's quite something. Do you know her? She's my wife, Ethan cut him off. 7 years together. Something flickered in the surgeon's eyes. Fear, guilt. He quickly turned toward the stove. I see. Ethan watched his back and thought. Something had changed. Questions had emerged where before there were only answers, but it changed nothing. The plan remained the plan. Outside the cabin, the blizzard raged. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, either from the cold or having scented prey. Just like me, thought Ethan, pulling out the map. Here they would climb to the glacier. Here they would perform the surgery. And afterward would come that trail, the one from which no one returns. Chapter 3: The Operation. They spotted the injured man's camp at dawn the following day. The orange tent appeared as a tiny speck on the vast white canvas, 13,000 feet above sea level. Here, the air was so thin that each step felt like wading through chest-deep water. The snow beneath their feet no longer squeaked, it crunched like broken bones. Ethan led the way, methodically breaking trail through the fresh powder. Harrison followed close behind, firmly gripping the handles of his medical case, the only burden they had dared bring to such an elevation. A woman crawled from the tent, disheveled, her eyes red from sleeplessness. Seeing them, she awkwardly rose to her feet. Thank God, we thought. Her voice broke. Ethan recognized the symptoms of altitude sickness: pallor, shortness of breath, slowed movements. Mrs. Walker, Harrison dropped his backpack. I'm Dr. Harrison, how's your husband? Bad, she fought back tears. He's barely responded for the past 2 hours. From inside the tent came the soft beeping of a portable heart monitor. Harrison ducked inside, Ethan right behind him. The cramped space smelled of vomit and something metallic, blood. On a sleeping bag lay a man in his mid-40s, gray as a February sky. Pulse thready, BP 60/40. Harrison's voice became clipped, professional. Ethan, I need light, maximum light. The next 10 minutes were spent opening the tent flaps, setting up portable lamps, preparing the surgical site. Walker was barely breathing. His wife, a nurse from Denver they discovered, helped arrange instruments with trembling hands. What time is it? Asked Harrison, pulling on sterile gloves. Ethan checked his watch. 7:45 a.m. By evening it'll be near zero up here. We need to finish before dark. He bent over the patient, carefully palpating the abdomen. His movements took on a feline grace, not a single wasted gesture. Ethan found himself admiring this calibrated precision. Perforated ulcer, Harrison muttered. Maybe peritonitis already. Mrs. Walker, can you assist? The woman nodded, swallowing hard. I have some training from the hospital. Excellent, Ethan. What do you need? Hold him. If he moves, we're finished. The whine of a surgical drill shattered the mountain silence. Harrison worked swiftly and methodically, like an automaton. His fingers moved with incredible speed despite the cold and altitude. Ethan, pinning the trembling patient to the makeshift operating table, couldn't tear his gaze from this lightning-fast dance of hands, scalpels, and clamps. Time stretched like rubber. Seconds transformed into minutes, minutes into hours. Sweat froze on Harrison's forehead in tiny crystals. Once, Walker's heart stopped. 5 minutes of chest compressions under the howling wind beyond the thin tent walls. Once, Mrs. Walker fainted. Ethan barely caught her before she hit the ground. Silk, commanded Harrison. Fatigue saturated his voice. Last suture. Outside, darkness was already falling. They had spent nearly 12 hours in the tent. 12 hours balancing between life and death at 13,000 feet. The monitor showed a steady rhythm. Walker was breathing raspy but unassisted. His wife sobbed, her face buried in Ethan's shoulder. And Harrison Harrison simply sat in the snow, leaning against his backpack, staring at the darkening sky. "You saved him, Doc," said Ethan. "We all saved him." Harrison struggled to his feet. "Call the helicopter." "Helicopter can't land at this elevation." Ethan consulted the map. "We need to get him down at least 3,000 feet. They fashioned improvised stretchers from ski poles and a sleeping bag. The descent took almost 6 hours, a slow, agonizing movement down the steep slope. Harrison went ahead, holding the front handles and constantly checking the patient's condition. Walker remained unconscious but breathed steadily. His wife stumbled alongside, ready to help at any moment. The wind strengthened with each passing hour. Heavy gray clouds blanketed the sky. They managed to descend to 10,000 feet when Ethan finally established radio contact with base. "Base, respond to team. Over." "Hearing you," Jenny's voice came through intermittently. "How's the patient?" "Alive, surgery successful. We're at 10,000 feet. Can a light helicopter land here?" A long pause followed, filled with crackling static. "Helicopter ETA 40 minutes. Found a suitable landing zone." Ethan surveyed the surroundings. They had just emerged onto a small plateau, flat enough for landing. "Affirmative, transmitting coordinates." The helicopter appeared as dusk approached, a small dragonfly against the leaden sky. The pilot managed a virtuoso landing on the tiny clearing. Together with Harrison, they loaded the stretcher. Space allowed only for the injured man and his wife. "Thank you," Mrs. Walker tearfully embraced first Harrison, then Ethan. "You saved his life." They watched as the helicopter rose into the air, becoming a tiny speck. Now only the two of them remained, the rescuer and the surgeon, with a long journey home ahead. Ethan pulled out the map. In the gathering gloom, the route lines resembled winding serpents. They would camp here for the night. And tomorrow would begin that infamous trail, the path from which no one returns. "We need to find shelter." Harrison adjusted his backpack straps. "There'll be another storm by nightfall." "Yes," thought Ethan, tucking away the map. "By nightfall there'll be a storm in every sense." Chapter 4: The Trap. Morning dawned windless and deceptively clear. The sun struck their eyes, reflecting off the snow crust in thousands of icy fragments. Locals called such days death days, when the midday sun partially melts the snow, only for it to refreeze at night, transforming slopes into enormous skating rinks. Such days saw the most tragedies. "Do we really have to take this route?" Harrison stopped, breathing heavily. After yesterday's marathon surgery, he looked haggard, deep shadows nested beneath his eyes. "The map shows an easier path." "This way is faster." Ethan carefully averted his gaze. He disliked lying. The military had taught him to value honesty. But this was a necessary deception, or rather, one in the service of justice. The glacier beneath their feet rumbled dully, like an enormous drum. Each footstep echoed in its frozen depths. They walked along the edge of a vast ice field, wedged between sheer cliffs. To the right rose a gray granite wall. To the left stretched a white desert crisscrossed with crevasses. Ethan deliberately led them through the most dangerous section. "In Afghanistan," Harrison suddenly spoke, "we often operated in the mountains, but it was warmer there, and lower." "About that case with the boy," Ethan jumped across a small crevasse. "What happened to him afterward?" "He survived. Lives in Kabul now, has his own workshop. Sends photos every Christmas." Pride resonated in the surgeon's voice. Ethan glanced sideways at him, a man who had saved hundreds of lives, who yesterday had fought for 12 hours to save a stranger at 13,000 feet, and who had slept with his wife. The first sound resembled a gunshot, sharp like the crack of a whip. Beneath Harrison's feet, a thin web of fractures spread. He didn't even have time to cry out. The ice collapsed, dragging him into the black maw of the crevasse. Ethan acted on instinct, lunging forward, grabbing the safety rope. Then something happened that he hadn't anticipated. A massive section of ice, dislodged by Harrison's weight, began to move. Ethan felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. Wind whistled in his ears, his stomach lurched toward his throat. They were falling into the icy abyss. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. The world transformed into a kaleidoscope of white and blue. They tumbled down an ice chute, helpless as rag dolls. Ethan tried to anchor himself with his ice axe, useless. The ice was hard as steel. When it ended, the first thing he heard was the sound of dripping water. Water seeped from cracks in the ice walls, falling into small depressions on the crevasse floor. Ethan carefully sat up, wincing as pain shot through his entire body. Miraculously, nothing seemed broken, lucky to have landed in a deep snow drift. Harrison lay nearby, motionless as a corpse. "Hey, Doc," Ethan crawled toward him. A ridiculous thought flashed through his mind. If the surgeon were dead, revenge would lose its meaning. "You alive?" Harrison groaned, opening his eyes. "Think so, just my leg." The jagged wound on his right shin looked nasty, but the bones were intact. Ethan retrieved the first aid kit, the same one they had used during the surgery. Funny how life comes full circle. He was just finishing the bandage when he noticed Harrison breathing more rapidly and shallowly. His eyes widened, his gaze darting across the icy walls of the crevasse. "Tight," whispered the surgeon, "too tight." Ethan recognized that look. It was the expression of someone with claustrophobia when the space around them constricts like a noose. The ice walls rose a good 100 feet, converging at the top and leaving only a narrow strip of gray sky. "In Afghanistan," Ethan grabbed Harrison's shoulders. "In that pit, how did you cope?" "Counted," Harrison exhaled. "Counted cracks in the wall, rats' heartbeats." "Good, let's count together, look at me." For the next 10 minutes they counted, cracks in the ice walls, water drops, clouds in the narrow strip of sky. Ethan talked nonstop about the mountains, his first climb, how he learned to read weather from clouds. Gradually, Harrison's breathing steadied. 3 weeks, he murmured. "I spent 3 weeks in that pit, 6 by 6 feet, darkness, rats, thought I'd dealt with it afterward, but sometimes." "We all have our demons." Ethan stood, examining the walls. "Now we need to get out." Somewhere above, the glacier shifted again. They were fortunate. The crevasse walls weren't completely vertical, with enough protrusions. If they distributed their weight properly and moved cautiously. "Can you climb?" Harrison tried standing, wincing. "If the alternative is freezing to death here, then yes." While Ethan prepared the equipment, hammering in pitons, securing ropes, Harrison sat leaning against the ice wall, his gaze fixed on the narrow strip of sky. "You know," he said suddenly, "I think I owe you something about Meredith." Ethan froze, ice axe in hand. Here it was, that moment. But instead of the expected fury, he felt only weariness, and something else. "Not now," he cut Harrison off. "First we get out." The ascent resembled climbing into hell in reverse. Slow, torturous movement up iced-over walls. Ethan went first, hammering pitons and preparing the way. Harrison struggled behind, biting his lip against the pain in his injured leg. The crust crumbled beneath their fingers like stale bread. The wind intensified, hurling stinging snow needles into their faces. Once, Harrison slipped, and only the safety line saved him from falling. Ethan held the rope, feeling his joints strain. "Hold on," he shouted, "not much further." The final meters proved especially difficult. Ethan pulled himself up by his arms, rolled over the edge of the crevasse, and extended his hand to Harrison. "Come on." Their fingers met. Ethan yanked upward, leveraging his entire weight. For a moment, he thought he saw his father, who had similarly pulled people from icy crevasses, until that fateful day when he couldn't escape one himself. They collapsed onto the snow, gulping the frigid air. The sky overhead was already darkening with heavy clouds. Another storm approached. Ethan struggled to sit. In his backpack still lay the map with the marked route, that one from which no one returns. But something had changed. He himself didn't understand what. Harrison also sat up, grimacing from the pain in his leg. "You could have left me." "Could have? Why didn't you?" Ethan didn't answer. Perhaps because he saw in the surgeon that same boy from Afghanistan, a person deserving a second chance. Or perhaps simply because his father would never have forgiven him any other decision. The storm advanced from the northwest, shrouding the mountains in a gray veil. They needed to find shelter before dark. Leaning on each other, they stumbled along the slope, leaving behind the black maw of the crevasse. In the small cave they discovered just before nightfall, it was dry and relatively warm. Ethan started a fire with the remaining dry fuel. The flames cast bizarre shadows on the icy walls. Harrison sat with his injured leg extended, staring into the fire. "Listen, Ethan," he said finally, "about what I wanted to say earlier." Chapter 5: The Return. Truth resembles an avalanche. Once it breaks loose, nothing can stop it. Ethan realized this as he watched the man across from him. In the flickering firelight, the surgeon's face appeared carved from stone. Beyond the cave walls, a blizzard raged, but here, in this tiny space between ice and fire, two men prepared for a conversation that would change them both. "I need to tell you about Meredith," Harrison grimaced, adjusting his injured leg. "About what happened at the hotel, and about who I really am." Ethan silently added branches to the fire. Killing a man is simple. Far more difficult is listening to his confession, especially when revenge still smolders within. "You know, I was married once before." Harrison pulled out a worn wallet. "Beautiful story, young surgeon and nurse, classic romance. I was certain it would last forever." "What happened?" The words escaped Ethan involuntarily. "I met someone else, a colleague at a conference. Smart, ambitious." Harrison smiled bitterly. "Very similar to your wife, come to think of it. It all unfolded the same way, conversations about potential, about city life, about real career opportunities." A gust of wind hurled a handful of snow through the narrow cave entrance. Ethan felt the familiar wave of anger rising, but now it contained something new. "I left my first wife. And my son." Harrison traced the edge of his wallet. "He was 9 then. You know what he told me the last time we met? 'Dad, I don't want to be like you.' A year later, he was gone, leukemia. I didn't even make the funeral, too busy building my career in the big city." He removed 2 photographs from his wallet. In the first, a smiling boy with a baseball bat. In the second, 2 young girls. "When Emily was born, I swore," his voice faltered. "I swore I'd never betray my family again. Kept that promise for 10 years. Then your wife came to my room, on her own." Ethan clenched his fists. "Doc, why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know how it really happened, who you're living with and sharing a bed with." Harrison looked up. "She came, all impressed with my work, said she followed every publication, that in this God-forsaken hole her talent was wasting away, that she was willing to do anything." He grimaced. "Absolutely anything, if you catch my meaning, to escape to the big city." "And you couldn't resist?" Steel resonated in Ethan's voice. "No, at that moment I actually refused. I honestly told her I was married with children. You know what she said? 'Oh, that's not a problem. I'm happy to be your mistress. You don't think I'm expecting marriage, do you? I just need a man with status and your connections.'" A log in the fire split, scattering sparks. Ethan watched one burn a hole in his jacket sleeve, thinking how words can burn more fiercely than fire. "And then you agreed?" "Yes." Harrison didn't avert his gaze. "A moment of weakness. I didn't even ask if she was married. I didn't know, honestly, just gave in to temptation. Man to man, you should understand, small town, local beauty offering everything with no strings attached." They sat in silence. The fire burned low, casting strange shadows on the ice walls. In these shadows, Ethan imagined ghosts of the past, his father who died in these mountains saving others, Harrison's son not living to see his 10th birthday, themselves, young, honest, believing in love. "I was planning to kill you, Doc," Ethan finally said. "Lead you here to that route. Do you know how many people have died there? 5 groups in 10 years, all accidents." "I know," Harrison nodded. "Figured it out during the tent operation from your expression, but there were more pressing matters. And you still came with me, didn't try to squeeze into the helicopter." "After what I'd done," the surgeon shrugged, "maybe I deserved it." "No," Ethan shook his head. "You didn't. You found the courage to confess, to apologize, my wife." He laughed bitterly. "She could never do that. For her, everyone's just a stepping stone. First me, then you, who knows what's next." The wind outside subsided, as if listening to their conversation. Harrison took out his phone. It had miraculously survived the fall into the crevasse. The screen wallpaper showed the 2 girls. "Emily's 16, asthma since birth," his voice warmed. "Brilliant kid, wants to become a doctor. Grace is 9, loves drawing. You know what she told me before I left? 'Daddy, you'll come back, right? Promise.'" "What did you say?" "That I promise, and that I'll never betray them again." Ethan looked at the surgeon and saw not an enemy but a man. Broken, remorseful, trying to piece together the fragments of his life. A man who found strength to acknowledge mistakes and begin anew. "What now?" asked Harrison. Ethan pulled out the map. The revenge plan he had nurtured crumbled like the burnt embers in their fire, but something new took its place, a plan for justice. "Now," he folded the map, "we teach a lesson to the one who truly deserves it, the one who exploits others' weaknesses to build her own life, and I think I know how." Understanding flickered in Harrison's eyes. "I have an idea." They talked almost all night. The plan was simple and elegant in its cruelty, like the mountains themselves. By morning, when the blizzard finally subsided, all details were agreed upon. Dawn found them already descending. They took the safe route, helping each other on difficult sections. Ethan no longer thought about revenge. This was now an operation to restore justice. And in this endeavor, like in real surgery, precision, composure, and clean hands were essential. Below in the valley, the rooftops of Pine Ridge were already visible. Somewhere down there, in her comfortable apartment, Meredith was undoubtedly plotting her next move, unaware that her house of cards was about to collapse. Ethan found himself smiling. Sometimes fate chooses strange paths to deliver a lesson. Sometimes you must climb to a mountain summit to see the truth lying at its base. Chapter 6: The Reckoning. Revenge, when properly prepared, isn't served cold. It's served with a smile. Ethan realized this watching Meredith flutter through the hospital corridor, repeatedly, accidentally appearing beside Dr. Harrison. 3 days had passed since their return from the mountains, and all of Pine Ridge buzzed about the miraculous rescue, about the brilliant surgery at 13,000 feet, about the heroic surgeon from Boston. Meredith's heels tapped a victorious rhythm on the hospital linoleum. She seemed to have grown younger these past days, her eyes gleaming with a special brightness. Ethan recognized that gleam, the look of a predator sensing prey. "Richard," she placed her hand on Harrison's elbow, "you simply must share your extreme conditions surgical technique at tonight's consultation." The surgeon smiled, with exactly the same smile he had worn 3 days ago in the cave, discussing their plan. "Of course, and, Meredith, may I have a word?" They moved to a corner of the corridor. Ethan, pretending to study the duty roster, watched Harrison quietly speaking to his wife, saw her eyes widen, saw the flush rise to her cheeks. "Really?" Her voice trembled with excitement. "In Boston, at your clinic?" "Certainly," Harrison spoke softly, but Ethan knew every word. They had rehearsed this conversation. "Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted in the provinces. I happen to have a department head position opening up." The elevator chimed, disgorging a fresh batch of nurses. Ethan turned back to the roster, hiding his smirk. The first phase of the plan had worked perfectly, bait swallowed, hook set deep. That evening Meredith returned home later than usual. She seemed to glow from within, her cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling. Ethan sat in his armchair, pretending to read the newspaper. "Honey," she perched on the armrest, "we need to talk." Finally, he thought, "Go ahead, dear, tell me everything." "I've filed for divorce," she blurted in one breath, as if jumping into icy water. Ethan slowly lowered the newspaper. "Excuse me, what? Is this some kind of joke, Meredith?" "Don't pretend you don't understand," hysteria edged into her voice. "We both know I deserve better. This hole, these mountains, I'm suffocating here. And you don't even try to change anything." Interesting, thought Ethan. Did she rehearse this speech in front of the mirror? "And to think I wasted 7 years on you." She paced the room, working herself into a frenzy. "For what? To rescue drunk tourists from crevasses, to listen to your endless stories about mountains, to sleep with visiting doctors," he quietly concluded. Meredith froze mid-sentence. A silence fell over the room, as resonant as the moment before an avalanche. The wall clock ticked away seconds. Ethan watched emotions chase across his wife's face, surprise, fear, and then triumph. "What if I did?" She raised her chin. "Yes, I slept with Richard, and you know what? He's inviting me to Boston. I'll be heading a department at his clinic, while you'll stay here in your mountains rescuing idiot tourists. Find yourself a wife from the local dairy farmers." She pulled a crumpled envelope from her purse. "Here, divorce application, I've already filed it. And you know what? I don't even care. 7 years. God, how could I waste 7 years on such a loser?" "Such a what?" Ethan rose from his chair. "Go on, say it. Such a failure, provincial. A man who saves lives instead of building a career." Something in his voice made her step back. I'm leaving." Richard left a ticket for tomorrow's flight at the hotel reception desk. "Of course," Ethan smiled. "Go, or rather get out, collect your ticket, start your new life. Leave the house keys on the hook by the front door." She grabbed her bag and car keys. At the door she turned. "You know what's really funny? You're not even trying to stop me, because you're a fool." "Why would I?" He shrugged. "Go, you're right, you deserve exactly this." The front door slammed. Ethan went to the window, watching Meredith get into her car. He took out his phone, dialed. "She's on her way." The sound of the engine dissolved into the evening twilight. Ethan sank back into his chair, feeling a strange emptiness inside. 7 years of life had just flown out the window. 7 years of illusions, hopes, self-deception. When Meredith arrived at the hotel reception, Harrison was already flying home. In the envelope, instead of a plane ticket, lay $300 and a note in Harrison's handwriting. Payment for services rendered were even. Pity you couldn't appreciate what truly has value, the love of a worthy man. "Think she got the message, Ethan?" Harrison's voice on the other end held a hint of amusement. "Oh yes," Ethan leaned back in his chair. "300 for a night, that's actually generous." "You know," Harrison said after a pause, "I owe you thanks." "For what?" "For not pushing me into that crevasse, for giving me a chance to make things right. I spoke with Allison today, told her the whole story." "How'd she take it?" "Said she needs time but appreciates my honesty, but she's willing to try for the girl's sake." Ethan gazed out the window at the snow-capped peaks in the distance. The mountains were indifferent to human passions. They simply stood, eternal and unchanging, keeping their secrets. "Go back to your family, Doc," he said finally, "and cherish them." "What about you?" "I'll stay here. Somebody has to rescue idiot tourists." A chuckle came through the receiver. "You know, for a man who rescues idiots, you're a damn good psychologist." "No," Ethan shook his head. "Sometimes you just need to climb very high to see the truth." He hung up and sat long in the darkness, watching the mountains. Somewhere out there, In a luxurious hotel room, an expensively dressed woman sat with a suitcase packed for relocation, staring at an envelope containing $300, realizing all her dreams of a glamorous life had just crashed against harsh reality. And in another city, another woman might find strength to forgive a husband who found the courage to acknowledge his mistakes. The wind outside howled like a hungry wolf. Ethan smiled. The mountains were calling him again. Tomorrow would bring a new day, a new climb, new lives to save. But for now he could simply sit in the darkness and watch as the last 7 years of his life melted away into the night.